Well, we still have a few people logging in this morning, but those of you that could join us live, thank you for being here for our next session in the 21 indispensable qualities of a leader. Today's topic is security, and I really want to encourage you. Of course, if you're on, maybe you don't need the encouragement, but want to encourage you to continue participating live. We don't have many more sessions left. Our next session will be self-discipline. So these are great, important topics coming up, and we really want to encourage you to be with us live. Today, we have a guest speaker, guest lecturer. It's Dr. Adam Kletzer. He is in the Agricultural Education and Leadership program at the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources at the University of Missouri. Wow, that's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, it takes up a lot of space, yeah.
But Dr. Kletzer has a PhD in Leadership Development and Social Change from Virginia Tech. He is formerly an Extension 4-H agent in Florida for 6 years, and he also worked for the Florida 4-H Foundation for 2 years. He teaches leadership in today's world. He teaches leading organizational and community change, both in the leadership and leadership development for youth organizations. Teaches those classes at the University of Missouri, where they have a master's program and a doctorate program in agricultural education and leadership. His research interests include the history of leadership, eco-leadership, complexity leadership, and evil leadership. That one is particularly interesting to me, right? Evil leadership. So he's going to be talking to us today about this indispensable quality of security. Dr. Kletzer, it's great to have you here today. I'll hand it off to you, and thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think whenever you approached me, I think security was one of like 3 that were left, but I think that like if we'd gotten started in the, like if I had all the options, I probably still would have chosen security. A lot of the things that are on the list are very like sort of relatively recent phenomena, and like security is one of those things that like cuts really deep, like in leadership development and in the sort of evolutionary basis for it. So anyway, so we can go ahead and get started then. This is my little introductory slide. This was hopefully y'all can see everything fine. This is my favorite picture of me because I ended up on a brochure, and this is my unimpressed panelist face at the International Leadership Association conference. And I thought it was, I don't know, that's just the one that I like to go with. But so this is, it's time for our poll. I figured I'd, get us started off talking, hopefully. I really hope that you all want to talk to me. So my question to you is it's a little bit of a philosophical question, but you only get to answer yes or no. And it is it the responsibility of a leader to make followers feel secure? And I feel we'll start there and see what you guys think. I like to get everybody's sort of opinions out there, and then we'll kind of return to it as we go. So I don't know how the polling works.
Well, we'll try to get up to at least 80% participation here, and then I'll share the results for you. So people are weighing in. We're getting close. That's a great question. Is the responsibility of a leader to make followers feel secure?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. We have at least one person that's commented in chat that they think it's more 50-50.
Sure.
Yes and no, but it looks like, and some want you to define secure.
We're going to do all those things today. These are good.
Here's our results.
Okay. Very fun. I've never actually done a poll in one of these things before, so this is a lot of fun for me. So we got 80% say yes, 17% say no. We got some other, and then we got a lot of comments in the chat. With define secure, you can try. They can help them feel secure, but they can't make them. So these are all good things. It keeps popping back up here. like, I'm not going to tell you what I think the answer is right now, but I promise you we'll revisit this as we sort of get to the end. My next question is like a question for you all if I can get back to there it is, for the chat itself. And so I'm kind of interested to hear what you think, because I think we're in kind of a special time here, like with the COVID being like kind of an unprecedented thing that we're dealing with. And like the people are feeling very insecure and very, sort of like concerned and everything. And so my question is like, what is the role of extensions leaders during COVID with regard to security? And you can interpret that however you want. And also, like, I'm not asking you to like pass judgment on their response. Like, I'm not like, I don't know who's watching, or this is, recorded, so I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but general thoughts on like an ideal response and what that would look like. So, whenever you get a chance there. So we got engagement. All right. We got food security. Where can people find pantries, farmers, markets? Okay. So like very practical sorts of things. This is kind of fun for me. I've never done one of these before via Zoom. Stay calm, right? Usually whenever I record lectures for my lessons, and it's just me here and I get no response at all. Like, so I just like making my own jokes and laughing, and I don't know what the kids think. Like most of the time they don't even watch the videos. And so it's nice that you all are here. Not to be paternalistic, but to offer facts and helpful direction. Okay. I absolutely believe it's the responsibility of a leader to make others feel secure. It's one of the most important pieces to leadership. When people are insecure, they cannot thrive, nor can they make good decisions. We got trust from community, provide information and be in touch, be a source of information, guide to the public resources that they need. So yeah, these are good ones. Yeah. All right. I'm going to X that guy out, and then we'll kind of move on a little bit. One of the things that I wanted to do sort of off the bat, somebody put this in the comment, like, define security. Well, this is that moment, because Maxwell doesn't really define security like in his book. But like if I had to, pick out like what I think he's talking about, I think he's predominantly in that sort of element of like sort of emotional security. Like when you think about people being like emotionally insecure, like what is the opposite of that? And so I, kind of labeled it as a dyadic sort of give and take between leader and follower. And so I pulled some quotes out. So, people without security cannot make others feel secure. They're primarily takers rather than givers. And I think that that's absolutely true, right? Like there's this idea that like we really expect for our leaders to be like a well, or a font of like making us feel secure, whatever that looks like, whether it's, like emotional security or a couple others I'll talk about in a minute. And that kind of bleeds over into like, emotional, like sort of security in terms of the follower. That's what the F's for. And then I also kind of picked out, in his writing about this idea of like kind of a performance-based security. And these three all kind of go together. But, when a follower has a great idea, like, do you support it or do you suppress it or do you hire the best people? And there's that element of, do I want to be outshined, basically? So those things like we'll call like sort of emotional, sort of or personal sort of security things. I wanted to add to it too, because I got 30 minutes to fill here. And also because security is a really complex kind of thing that I think that it'll help you to have like some better thoughts on, or some, kind of more widely like held thoughts on. And so one of them is like this idea of like sort of physical safety. Like if we think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like we tend to believe that leaders are supposed to provide for our sort of safety and security, and that could be like sort of, our physical, like personal safety, but it could also just be sort of our livelihoods. So we think about like eons ago, like sort of the head of the tribe or the chief of the village or the feudal lord, or like the head of the factory, like surely they won't sort of get rid of us. Like we've been here 20 years, like there's this, belief that the leader will sort of protect and sustain us. And that's a thing that we put them on a pedestal, and in return, we feel like that's a thing that they should provide. Whether or not that's logical or not is another sort of question, right? And we really want, and it's another thing we'll talk about, for our leaders to be like sort of omnipotent and omniscient. So like, to believe that they can take care of us, right? And so there's also like this social psychological piece, which is just this idea that, like we want them to foster sort of feelings of security amongst the group, like cohesion and esteem. And then there's also this sort of existential sort of thing. And this is like, we see this in business a lot. Like there's this idea that like, if we can find the right CEO with the right vision, then they will save our organization, right? And that in of itself is also a type of security. Like they're, like we're going to find the person and we're going to put them on a pedestal and they're going to make us feel sort of more secure, right? So these guys we'll call like sort of systemic types of security. And I want to talk about like all three of them today, right? And we'll kind of go through fairly quickly here. I don't want to run out of time. But we got sort of personal security we'll talk about. We'll talk about insecurity during change, which I think is really sort of relevant to this moment. And then also this idea of like systemic security, and I'll explain what that means. If I talk too fast, like just give me a hand wave or something like that. So I get going and I'm like, oh man, I'm excited to tell you about these things. So, the Maxwell chapter tends to focus on this sort of personal insecurity. And so and that makes sense because like when you write a book to become a better leader, you're focusing on what you can do as a leader. And so he says that insecure leaders sort of provide security don't provide security for other people, right? So there's this idea that like, you're like an emotional black hole, like you like suck up all, like you're very needy, There's also this idea of, you also sort of take more than you give, right? So when you're supposed to be sort of giving and empowering people, you're actually sort of, taking from them. And I see this play out like in extension. Again, I always like to sort of reference that I worked in as 4-H because I feel like it gives me some kind of street cred. I definitely have sort of worked there. And one of the ways that I see this, and maybe you've seen it, too, is that there's like people that maybe are feeling more insecure. They're like reluctant to make decisions that might lead to conflict or change. Like this is like a natural sort of stemming from this. I see it particularly in 4-H, like there's this, they sort of make it personal. Like it's not about maybe what's best for the program, but there's an element of, will people like me? Like, will people like our program? Like if we do this, like never mind whether it's good or strategic or whatnot. But so there's like, they're operating from sort of a place of insecurity and that's hampering the program. The other place that we see it is there's sort of this like performance one, like this is I referenced at the top. And that's this idea that like, you don't want to be outshined, by sort of your underlings or the people that work for you. And so that may lead you to not allow them to shine or to take credit or to subconsciously sort of sabotage their efforts, which is a really weird thing. And I've definitely sort of seen this play out where like people just can't stand to be sort of upstaged, and it does definitely stem from a sense of like personal insecurity. He talks about how they hoard power. And I would also add that cuts both ways. Like I've seen people like definitely like not want other people to have power. And so they, sort of like hold on and they don't let anybody make any decisions ever because they want to have all that control. But I've also seen, and I think it stems from the same place, people give away all their control. Like in 4-H in Florida, every 4-H agent's required to have an advisory group. And sort of unlike here, like they serve entirely at the pleasure of the agent. And, and I would say the agent like see that the advisory group like make a decision that they disagreed with and was bad for the program. And they would say something like, well, I didn't agree with it, but that's the way that they felt. And I'm like, but they work for you. Like, why didn't you fire them? But it like comes from, sort of this place of, sort of insecurity. And the other thing too, is like, I think that we tend to think about power as like a sort of, like a zero sum sort of game. Like if I have it, then you don't. And if I give it to you, then I don't have it. But a better way to think about it is that, leaders are generative and that they can increase people's power while not diminishing their own. And so one of the places where I see this in extension and just in business in general is people like won't hire people that will challenge them or like challenge the process or like might be smarter than them because that's really scary. And actually, this is my show and tell for the day. I'm reading Team of Rivals as basically like a sleep aid because it's this thick. But, like one of the things that Lincoln did that is like the opposite of this is that whenever he put together his first cabinet, like he went out and got people that he ran against and that were, opposed to him and, some kind like from different parties and they didn't like him, but he thought that would be sort of best. And that definitely comes from a place of security, right? And then like whenever you sort of combine all those things, you get like you start to limit the organization, like all those micro level, like holding people down and holding people back. Like eventually, like it sort of trickles up and it can make the organization overall sort of less competitive and less adaptive over time. And so sort of my sort of takeaways, like, in terms of personal security, like secure leaders, like the opposite, like aren't needy. Like if I had to sum up the Maxwell chapter, like they're not needy, right? Like they're in a good place sort of emotionally and psychologically, and they don't like, suck that up from their followers. They're generative, they empower others like without reducing their own power. There's a lot of different types of power. One of the ways that we like information and expertise are types of powers, and we see like a lot of times, like maybe people who are insecure will like want to hold information and not share it because it might, like they feel like that gives them a leg up or something. Whereas people that are, aiming to increase other people's power would definitely share that, right? They're not threatened by bringing the best people together, and they celebrate sort of other success. So I wish that I could be like, stop me at any time for questions, but there's questions at the end. So another one then is to think about is like kind of what we're going through right now, both with COVID and with the budget and like all the things that are coming out. And that is this idea of insecurity during change. And some of y'all alluded to this sort of in your comments. And this one is like security as it relates to the problem. And so I want to give you sort of two ways to sort of think through this. There's basically, according to Heifetz, this guy that works at Harvard, there's basically two types of problems in the world. And one of them he calls technical challenges. And it's like problems we've seen before. We already are well structured to solve them. Like we already know what the right answer is. Like we know what to do. And it might be difficult and it might be complex, but like we can do it and we're set up to do it. Like a technical challenge might be, and you can see where I'm going with this, like, the flu, like we know what the flu is. We have people who have the expertise to solve it. Like we're structured in terms of our healthcare system to be able to handle it. It's still a complex and difficult thing to deal with, but we're good at it. Adaptive problems, on the other hand, are ones that, are novel, like we've not seen them before. Tackling the problem, we can't jump into it right away because we have to learn. It may require us changing the way that our organization is structured. And then probably most difficult, it requires us to change values, priorities, beliefs, habits, attitudes, etc. And so this is more of like a COVID sort of thing, right? Like this is like not a thing we've seen before, and it requires us to change a lot of our sort of daily habits. Where this comes into security though, is that there are basically two types of leaders that people like see and want at different times. And so like technical challenge require like leaders that we think of as giving like authoritative expertise. So they show up on a white horse and they're like, I know what the problem is and I know how to fix it. I'm going to protect you from everything that is bad. I'm going to, remind us all to just do our jobs and, perform like your current role. I'm going to restore order and everything's going to be okay. Right. And this is almost always the leader that we want. But sometimes the leader that we need is somebody that shows up and says, there isn't a right answer to this. We've never faced this before. My job is not to know all the answers and solve all the problems, but instead to sort of frame key questions. And sometimes their job is to like let people know that this thing is an issue. Like if we were like, hey, it's early January and there's a outbreak of COVID in China, and we should all be really like concerned about this. Effectively what you're doing there is taking away people's security. And that's a little bit, different of a thing. And so, our job then as a leader in this type of role is to, disorient people from what they're used to doing. Like, don't do the thing that you always do because it's not going to help us in this situation, right? And like, we need to spend some time and think through like how to actually handle this. And not like settle into our old patterns too quickly, right? Because it probably won't fix the problem. And so sort of my takeaway for this guy, for you all who are doing leadership, is like people will almost always want you to respond as like a technical challenge, because what they can do is they can say, I've elected you or I've selected you or I've hired you to fix this problem, go fix the problem and leave me alone, right? And they want a leader that responds like this. And we've all been sort of socialized to want to be this type of leader to provide security. And we call this the flight to authority, and it's generally bad. And so what I'm telling you that sometimes the right answer, whenever you face a problem that doesn't have a right answer or not an answer that we've arrived at yet, is you need to be like sort of personally secure enough to not provide security, to come along and say like, listen, I'm going to be upfront with you and say like, this is going to be kind of scary. But I don't, like, it's not going to be helpful for me to be like, I can handle this. Just go back to what you were doing. Don't be alarmed. You don't want to be like a fear monger or anything, but like, I think being sort of honest and upfront is a good thing. So that kind of brings me, like, we're kind of backing into this a little bit. And there's this idea of like systemic security. And it's this idea of like the leader follower dynamic. And it's kind of a big picture sort of thing. But, like one of my big questions is why do followers want security? Like why, when John Maxwell writes his indispensable qualities of a leader, like why is it so taken for granted that, that is clearly like a thing that should go on the list, right? And the answer sort of like stems from this concept that we call the universality of leadership. And it's this just idea that like everywhere across all time and all places and all cultures, like everyone has done some form of leadership. Like it's been different, depending on where. And the reason behind that is like this concept of like evolutionary biologists taking a stab at this, and they basically said all people everywhere want order, they want direction, they want meaning, and they want safety and security. And when we're young, we get that from our parents. And when we're older, we tend to project that and want that from our leaders. And that in general, that's a good thing, because what it leads to in groups is cooperation. It leads to hierarchy, so like a leader and a follower role, and it leads to shared systems of meaning that build community, right? And the logic is that like people that were, sort of like wired for this DNA wise, like lived in groups and that were more productive, and they didn't starve and they didn't get eaten by lions. And so they passed on their genes. And that's why everybody today, like, except for sociopaths, like generally like want these things and are generally pretty good at working in groups. But this is just where I'm coming to, sort of all human behaviors on a spectrum. And so sometimes it can go really badly. And so the, sort of like bad things that people want from their leaders in relation to security are like almost all followers have some fantasies, like we call them the five or I can't remember how many there are, the core fantasies of followers. But like we want to believe that our leaders are omniscient and omnipotent. We want to believe that they care about us, and we want to believe that, that they're accessible, right? And all of that makes us feel sort of more secure. We also like tend to, because like we're people and we think people are super important, we also tend to want to put people at the, the crux of everything. Like, like why did gas prices go down? Well, that was people. Or like, why did this business fail? Well, that was people. But in reality, there's a lot of other sort of forces that aren't people that are acting upon, that business. And so, but the problem, the thing that's really interesting to me, at least, is that when the less information we have, the more apt we are to attribute like success or failure to leaders. And so like one of the derivatives of this is what they call the rally around the flag effect. Like anytime that we're like attacked or something bad happens, like the presidential approval ratings always go up, and it's this idea that like we really want to believe that that person will sustain us and protect us and provide security, and that makes us feel better, right? And then this one you can kind of take like with whatever, a grain of salt, because it's Freudian or whatever, but it's just general idea that like our first leaders are our mother and our father, and like they provide us a sense of security. And when we go out into the world, like we want to project that onto people and have them sort of fulfill those roles. And I feel like we've all worked in an office, or we've all worked in like a camp staff sort of situation where like the person in charge has sort of fulfilled that like mom or dad role. And like we bring them our problems and we tell them our, sort of troubles. And like we want them to resolve like little disputes between us, like we're siblings. And as weird as that is, that also sort of makes us feel secure, right? And so my point in this is just that, the John Maxwell book is kind of like, leaders provide the thing, and that's good. And all I really want for you to take away from this is that it actually flows both ways. Like, desires and the expectations, like, come from both groups of people, and they sort of feed on one another. And that it's like a fairly complicated thing. And then sort of my point is for you, like if you're doing leadership, and particularly if you're doing leadership in the face of change, like people are always going to want to try to extract a sense of security from you. And if you can give that, great. Like if it's fair, if you are like tackling a problem that is sort of technical, and, if it's just like an interpersonal sort of thing, like you don't want to be the needy one, and you can sort of, build them up and help them. But sometimes like that's not fair to you, right? And so it's like sometimes like, you can't provide it. And I think it's like incumbent upon us to be like really forthright and be like, look, this is like scary times. I'm gonna tell you what I know, and I'm gonna, be here to help you. But like, you like, don't put me on a pedestal and believe that I'm gonna fix all this, right? And so, and that takes like a certain sense of like your own sort of personal security to be able to, to want to do that, because we're sort of, what's the word, like socialized and taught that like we're supposed to solve problems and make everybody feel better, right? And so in some ways it kind of takes like a little bit of strength to push back against that, right? So we kind of go back to our main questions here. So like, is it the responsibility of leaders to make followers feel secure? And I would say that, like when you can, yes. And when like there's, whenever the sense of security would be false, then I would say no, right? So if I had to tie it all together, I would say, like John Maxwell's sort of, basic principle is like, don't be needy, right? So that's personal security / performance insecurity. And I think that's absolutely true. Like you don't want to be the person that is extracting your emotional well-being from your followers. Like if you're in a leadership position, I really believe that you should be in the business of empowering and building people up. But know that sometimes your job is not like, you don't want to like, drift into like a false sense of security. Sometimes your job is actually to sort of, alert them to threats and let them know that like sometimes your job is to like throw them into disequilibrium and say like, no, actually like you shouldn't be in this sort of false sense of security because I need your help solving this problem. Like, I can't do it all by myself. And then the other thing, sort of my takeaway for you in relation to security is that people will almost always want to sort of unfairly try to extract security from you, and that's not healthy for anybody, and so that's all kind of big and complex and whatnot. But, my takeaway is just that like, do it when you can, for sure. But like, don't do it when it isn't fair, because it like sort of robs your organization of people thinking and helping. And it robs your organization of like sort of all the, engagement of the people that are in it, right? If they're just relying on you to provide all these things. So that's kind of my like all big picture stuff. That's a lot more than the Maxwell book, but I just thought, like that would be kind of interesting to throw out and talk about anyway.
Yeah, wow. I would say, boom, mind blown there. This is obviously more content than a 30-minute presentation. This needs a lot more time on that whole topic. Wow, those are some things I never even thought about that you covered. There's bound to be questions, and if you have one, please ask it or share it in chat. And obviously our own insecurities as even followers play into this whole dynamic as well, it looks like. Cool.
So Mary says she's reading that book, right? Oh, the Team of Rivals book. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Sorry. Yeah. So happy to answer any questions. My sort of personal mission in my job is like to just be like, hey, leadership's more complicated than most, folks like than most books that people read. And I just want to, I want you to know that like sometimes you're getting pushed into doing a thing that isn't healthy, because people want to believe that, like we're going to put you on a pedestal and you can solve all our problems. And, I just want you to have some words to push back against that and know.
Well, it's relevant. I noticed in some of Maxwell's supplemental materials that he mentions, I think he uses the word most people are insecure. So there's always going to be that dynamic between the followers and leaders, the pushback from both directions on this security issue. Are there some other books or something on this topic that you recommend?
Yeah. I was I always look around, like I have my books. I do have a lot of books around me, but I don't know if they're the right ones. So like one of my favorite books is, I think I left it at the office. It's called, I can send it to you. It's called, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership. And it's like a textbook, but it's like almost like a workbook too. And that's where the technical versus adaptive problems come in. And it's very sort of practitioner oriented. And it's just this idea that, like there's a lot of sort of, like they do a really good job of distilling down like really complex things, so you don't have to like read all the papers, but you can kind of get the gist of it and apply it. And I use it in my leading organizational and community change class, and I think it is pretty applicable to what Extension does. The other thing that I forgot to mention is that like what we want in a leader changes over time, and like the idea that the leader should care about like our emotions and like our psychological well-being like didn't actually start until like 1955. Like if you, worked in a factory in 1930 and you're like, I want to take Myers-Briggs and talk about my feelings, they'd have just fired you. Like they, that wasn't a thing that they saw. Like they were like, that's not a leader's job. But, like starting in the 50s, we got sort of the human relations movement, the human potential movement, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And like out of that sort of time also came this idea that like leaders should care about. The other thing, it was a reaction to like the authoritarian leaders of World War II. They were like, you know what, we want not Hitler to be a leader, and we want people to care about us and to let us participate. And even though like it's changed since then, one of the things that we've taken with us is that like, we want leaders to care about us. We want them to have some level of emotional intelligence. We want them to sort of invest in us as people. And like that hasn't changed, but that's a fairly new phenomenon too.
Yeah. A couple of interesting comments here in the chat. We might go over just a minute or two here.
Sure.
From Lori, she says, calmness is contagious. And even if you feel slightly insecure, you can present things in a calm and measured manner, which leads to calm in your team, which leads them to be able to do their best thinking since there isn't an excess of cortisol, I think, running through their bodies. So calmness is contagious, that maybe that aids in security.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think that, like part of that's just sort of like that modeling the way piece, like even if you don't feel like there's a certain level of faking it till you make it,
How about this comment from Valerie here? Leaders develop leadership in others by letting them try to ride the bicycle and not jump in and exert their personal power to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Is that part of security then too?
I think so. Oh man, we have a kid on our street that's learning to ride a bike right now, and it's hysterical. Yeah, I think that like part of what they can do is try to build an environment in which failure is okay, and that you feel secure enough to like try a thing, and like that's part of growth, and like you're probably going to fall down a couple times. And I was reading the other day, it was about I can't remember what they called it, but it was about Aerosmith, and they have like a meeting like with their band, like back when they made music and stuff. And it was called like the No Dumb Ideas Hour or something. Like it was just this idea that they had sort of built this like thing into their sort of weekly ritual where it was okay to bring like your weirdest idea, and like 9 times out of 10 they failed, but sometimes it ended up being like dude looks like a lady or Love in an Elevator or any of the hits and stuff. And so, yeah, so, when like security can be like, Maxwell mainly wrote about it as that sort of like personal emotional security of the leader, but it can also be like a feeling amongst the group that they can, as the leader, try to work to develop. And I think that that's part of it. I hope I took that in a way that was useful.
Yeah. There's a great book called The Wisdom of Failure. Mm-hmm. And one of his points is that even like in job performance reviews, we penalize failure. So a lot of people don't even want to talk about it. We'll try to pretend it never happens. Whereas we should be encouraging people to recognize failure and to take lessons from it.
Right. Yeah, no, it's in the adaptive leadership book, they talk a little bit about that too. Like they basically like look at, and this is the way that I kind of look at like an organization like Extension is a complex system. And that, as the external environment changes, like it also has to change in order to continue being sort of relevant and sort of fit for its environment is the word that we would use. And like the role of leadership is to sort of act as a catalyst for that, and if the people who are sort of in charge are in the business of sort of squelching feedback loops is what we call them, like sort of squelching like new ideas or squelching people that want to try things that are different, well, then your organization can like become very stilted or ossify. And so it's like not able to adapt to whatever its new environment is because it's so like risk averse and failure averse. And that can be really bad, like in the long run as well as in the short run.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, same kind of concept, but yeah.
Well, another comment here. Let's see. Paula notes that her late husband used to tell his students that everyone has the right to be wrong.
Yeah.
I like
That's a
that.
good way A good way to live. Yeah.
I like that. Well, thank you for your presentation today. This is great content, one worth listening to again after I get the video uh, posted. A deep topic, and you certainly brought more out of the book than I had seen on first read. So thank you very much for your time. And everyone, we appreciate the 60 or so that logged in today and joined us online, and others can watch the video by the end of the day. So appreciate you all being here. If you want to stay around for an additional question, we'll stay on for just a minute or two.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all.